All right. So welcome everyone to another 21-minute live event. Joining me today is Gemma Blezard, CEO and Solution Architect for the Architect Club, as we continue our quest to Salesforce responsibly. And this time, in 21 minutes, we're here to answer, why should architects be involved in projects? Are architects even needed post-implementation? We're going to talk about implementation approaches, whether they're tailored or canned approaches, and which ones to take, and how to ensure that you don't place inexperienced architects in projects prematurely. So before we begin, just want to give a big shout out for those joining us from the Fort Lauderdale admin community. But Gemma, thank you so much for participating. I'm super excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, me too.
So let's just jump right in because we only got 21 minutes to talk. Why should architects be involved in projects?
I think that that question is easily answered if you understand what role these practitioners and professionals can play in a project towards keeping it successful. Architects act as a bridge between everyone, which means that they have skills that you can only really develop over time and over experience. Skills like setting expectations with customers, helping them to get the best out of their own relationships with their team of people who are looking after Salesforce, etc. So we need to be able to adjust our communication styles for different audiences, and those sorts of things come with experience. As for why they should be involved in projects, and this actually boils down to why I started the Architect Club in many ways, because when you see I've seen an awful lot of implementations where you're starting at the point after a lot of very, very big, important decisions have been made about a project or a program. And some of those decisions, they need architectural consideration, like the number of systems in play, like how we're going to integrate them, like why are we integrating in the first place, etc. So having an architect around nice and early before you've even decided how you're going, what your vision is for the project is going to really help you to be more successful in the project, because you'll be able to make better decisions with an architect's guidance and advice next to you, really. So that's why I think they should be involved. They play many roles, and they also help to not only enable the client to work on the project more smoothly, but also act as real coaches, mentors, and can share the benefit of their experience with the next generation of talent that's coming up at the moment. And that's why I think it's really important for them to be involved. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think that brings up a fantastic point, especially that last piece there, because I think a lot of times we talk about how Salesforce is such an amazing tool out of the box and how insanely flexible it can be, that I have personally seen as a consultant a lot of companies that got themselves in trouble by trying to tackle on Salesforce implementation, especially anything more than simple requirements, like pretty in-depth requirements with people that are trying to figure out on their first go. And that might be pretty, I guess, maybe obvious from my standpoint, but one of the things that you said that I really liked is the fact that having an architect right there in the beginning also paves the way for people that are going to follow, because you're leveraging that architect experience, especially right at the beginning, right? And the admins that are there learning, getting familiarized with it. I think that's a fantastic way for to leverage an architect during a project to be able to get themselves in a right footing in the projects to come. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do actually, and I think you're absolutely right, because as architects, our role is to ensure that any solutions we put in are scalable and performant. And so whenever I'm designing a solution, and like you say, just acknowledging that level of complexity that is at the point where you need an architect, where you've got perhaps a long solution that covers several different systems, bounces data in and out of Salesforce, makes flows and automations run all over the place. That's the kind of thing where you start to string multiple solutions together, the level of complexity goes up. Excuse me. Level of risk goes up, but your architects are there to make sure that whatever you decide to build in Salesforce or even indeed outside Salesforce to support that implementation, should last for as long as possible. You're not necessarily implementing just for one small bit of project work. You're, by comparison, if you think about your average Salesforce consultant, if you don't work in your end customer, if you're not the end customer who's using Salesforce, you're actually in there for 5 minutes compared to the other people who come after you. And I've said from the very beginning and throughout all my trainings and so on that, I feel like we have a responsibility to make sure that we leave the place clean and tidy once we've finished building, right? You don't get a new kitchen built and then just leave like rubble everywhere afterwards, do you? So, and it's your architect and your supervisors that will come along and say, please make sure that this is going to work, not just now, but in the future as well.
Sounds like that nice and tidy seems like a very mom comment to make, which I was like, maybe we should have more mom architects out there because they know how to keep things neat and tidy.
I don't. Have you seen my living room?
It's because you spent all of your energy making all of these Salesforce orgs tidy.
Yeah, tell me about it.
That's the excuse I have for my wife anyhow. So so why I'm behind on some of my chores. So it's interesting though, because that's a good segue here. We talk about leaving it nice and tidy, but are architects even needed post-implementation then?
I think they are, because Salesforce is never finished, and we say this from the beginning. And so many times I've been in meetings with clients, and I don't, it's not been frustrating per se, but it's been the same conversation over and over again. It always makes me smile. Is that, oh, now it's in, we don't need you anymore. You can kind of go and we'll go and do this. And then you say to them, well, what's your plan for the rest of your time, with Salesforce? Well, it's done now, isn't it? Maybe, we'll get someone in a couple of, let's play with it. We'll go and get used to it. And then maybe we'll call you back in the future, et cetera, because there's this vision that as a consultant, I'm trying to sell more hours, and I'm not. What I think makes architects really special here is that we ask these questions because if we've spent a lot of time working with a customer to realize that vision in Salesforce, and then we've managed to build it, obviously business priorities are going to change. The customer will have growth plans 90% of the time. So the reason that we might be needed post-implementation is to actually handle the risk of the system getting out of shape. Because once you get live, even though you can do all the UAT, user acceptance testing in the world, but still your system's never properly tested until it goes live, for sure.
Right.
And as people start to use the system, they're going to have snags, they're going to have enhancements, they're going to have questions, they're going to have new projects and new ideas that they want to, leverage Salesforce for. So are we needed post-implementation? Yes, because if you take a conversation with a salesperson coming up to a Salesforce admin who isn't thinking like an architect, the risk is that salesperson comes up, says, I want a flag, I want a checkbox that does this, and the admin builds it. Equally, good admins are the ones who will turn around and say, well, I could build it for you, but you've come to me with a solution instead of a problem. Tell me what you're trying to solve. We'll spend some time over it, because I understand all the other fields that are in the system that you could use and what other systems need to know about the data that's in this field, etc. So are we needed post-implementation? Yes, because we need to put a process in place to manage those little enhancements and make sure that any other initiatives that go on with Salesforce aren't affected by the hot fixes and the business as usual changes that will come in once everything's live.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because I 100% agree that, like, I love it when you said, people come to us sometimes with a solution, not a problem, or to the admin, better said, because it does happen, right? And a lot of times the admin, for a variety of reasons, might just nod their head and say yes. I've seen cases where in opportunities, people are just putting checkboxes for all the different possible campaigns. And I'm like, well, why aren't we leveraging the campaigns object? And there's like, well, they were just asking me of this of me. And I'm like, all right, well, let's see if we can change it around. And a lot of times they just become victims to saying yes to things. And
sorry,
go ahead.
just to that point, I just want to add something to that point as well, is that there's saying yes to things, and then there's actually trying to pick the path of least conflict and least resistance. Because taking that requirement, for example, you said having checkboxes for different campaigns. We know that on the opportunity object, there's a standard field called parent campaign. Now, trying to explain that to non-technical people, that it's a lookup field and that you have to start typing and click in the magnifying glass to find your campaign. And if you can't find it, it's probably because it's not active or because it's not been added into the system yet. What's quicker? And is that conversation above your pay grade or not? And that's why the architect can come in, because the architect is a trusted advisor in that sense, and is able to say those things that maybe admins might and end users might actually be able to say, but not necessarily influence in any way.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And again, love how you say that, the advisor part, right? It's that the architect doesn't need to come in and be a full-time job, but you should still recognize the need for an advisor and when to use an advisor, right? Because a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, we already paid all this money, we're good, we'll figure ourselves out. And next thing you know, that you start getting into trouble, right? So there's so much that I can take this conversation. We only have 21 minutes, but I'm passionate about architecture. I know you are. Let me take this opportunity to segue into the implementation approaches. Because you mentioned the tailored or canned approaches. So tell me a little bit more about how a canned approach would work and whether one should look into a more tailored versus a canned approach.
I think it depends on the context that you're looking at. My background is as a Salesforce partner, so I'm very familiar with the partner ecosystem, and I've worked for several consultancies. So when I'm looking at Salesforce, I'm usually looking at somebody else's Salesforce and trying to get it set up so that then they're on a good track, on an even footing and ready to go. In terms of, so I'm going to speak about it in the context of that partner market. The Salesforce consultancy market is quite noisy. And there's loads of companies that do the same thing. And, fair enough. I also have a registered partner consultancy as well. And it's really hard when you all basically do the same thing, which is giving advice on Salesforce. You have to specialize in order to compete. And we know there's plenty of work out there because there's plenty of customers, that new customers on board that we know buy Salesforce all the time. And it's, getting a share of that work out there is what's keeping these businesses going. And so that there is so in that noisy kind of environment, many businesses have been studying Agile, and it's a fashionable approach at the moment. Have we lost sight of a society as to why it's so fashionable? I don't know. Another question for another day. But many flavors of Agile are actually set up and claimed as a USP for many consultancy firms. This is our, extra special methodology, which is basically Watergile.
Right.
So, and I don't blame, I'm not saying, I don't mean that in a scathing way in any way. I mean, what else can you do in such a noisy market? But the thing is about agile principles, and why I'm such a fan of it, is that it relies on trust. The problem is that human beings naturally don't trust each other. So I actually believe that going in there with the same cookie cutter kind of methodology works if you are building a consultancy business to scale, because and actually, again, it is still a worthy and valuable go-to-market strategy, because obviously your customers, they make the decision during the pre-sales as to whether your approach as a consultancy firm is going to suit how they work. I actually believe that some companies can't do Agile and some companies can't do waterfall. So in our approach, what we actually pride ourselves on is looking at is taking a real stock of what's going on in that company in terms of culture, in terms of DevOps, in terms of design standards, integration strategies. What are the risks? What are the people, process, and system risks around the actual development of requirements? You know, sometimes customers need help with just being great customers.
Yeah.
So I think we have another role to assist our customers in being better customers. And we can do that by, I mean, like I said, to scale, the canned approach is favorable because you can put some packages together, you can sell to clients, reduce the time taken to do the work and leave the level of effort the same, and everybody's happy, right? But I actually prefer a collaborative approach where you actually embed yourself into the client's business and you take responsibility for getting to know it like it's your own. It's not yours, but, and you have to remember that at some point, but if you actually, it helps you to really empathize with the client. And I think empathy is an absolutely must-have skill for any architect, not just talking about empathy, but actually saying, okay, what are we going to do to make our sales better this year, etc. So I actually think that, so tailored versus canned implementation approach, I prefer the tailored approach personally, because you can bring the client along for the ride. And if you bring the client along from the ride, you teach self-sufficiency from a realistic trainer who has got all of the battle scars. So, you know, they learn on the job. You know, but if it just depends, it really does depend on what that client wants to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think the culture of a company, of the customer company, is crucial, right? When it comes to dictating what's going to work and not work. And I think that one of the biggest lessons learned that I've had from an architect or from a consulting side is that I can already tell early on whether an organization would be a good fit for us or not. Or let me change it around. Sorry. That we will be a good fit for them or not, simply because a lot of times companies have a very specific mindset on how they want to do things. And, you know, we are not a waterfall type company or organization. We don't do very well with that, particularly because we're always pushing for new features as we're understanding better the requirements and all of these other items. So we as full op thrive a lot better in agile, and we tend to find customers that do well. So maybe one of the big lessons learned here is that, you know, for a customer looking for it, they should look at their own culture, and maybe it should be one of the questions that they address if they're watching this, right? Anybody watching this right now, it should be definitely something that they should address, not only in types of requirement, but in how the culture is for the build out, right?
Yeah, and I think that's important as well. And that's why we like, as architects, we like to get involved nice and early, because part of that lay of the land is in analysing what's the cultural risk here. What about your personalities that you've selected for your delivery team? Do we think that you know, if we've got two people on the team that don't like each other, this is all what many people refer to as the fluffy HR stuff, but it's absolutely fundamental
Right.
for sure for that success. So being here to kind of advise on the types of skill sets that we need, the types of experience we need on our project SME team, you know, is fundamental, and leading into the thought around inexperienced architects as well. You know, I think we talked about last time, we talked about how do we make sure we don't place inexperienced architects in prematurely. I actually think there's no such thing as an inexperienced Salesforce architect. An architect is an architect because they've got that experience. They've spent time consulting. They've spent time stringing different solutions together into one big whole. And I feel like that's the point where you know, once you've got those people in there on your project, this is why you need to make sure that your architects, that whichever architects you hire, are leaders, and they're going to take ownership of not only their work but of the team as well, and help everyone in that team progress.
I like that. I think that that's an important piece as well, because I agree with you. An architect does need to go beyond just having a technical knowledge. And there's conversations between solutions architects and technical architects, but there is a component of leadership to push and rally everyone behind a vision, because to some extent, I've seen a lot of situations where the true champion of a project, at least by definition, where it should be the executive that kind of rallies, that person is not always there and available. That person might be the one that signed the check and said, yeah, let's get everybody in Salesforce. And then, you know, 2 seconds later, they're off to other initiatives. And in that absence, the architect really becomes kind of like that person who could genuinely rally and challenge people to have a successful project. So I completely agree with you there. I did have an amazing thought that I also wanted to share, and I completely forgot. But
it happens.
Yeah, but I agree. Any other final thoughts or comments on that piece?
I suppose I just kind of want to share something that we've been doing lately. Because it is relevant from that perspective. One of our clients tried 3 times to implement CRM across different platforms, lots of different platforms. And the current state of things is that their CRM is only used just for putting orders on, because, you know, that everybody knows that once the order goes into that CRM, it goes into Oracle and everything gets processed. Everything up until that point is completely optional and it's not being used. So there was a very real concern about whether this organization as a company would feel capable of implementing CRM, given the experiences that they had had 3 times to that point. And what we found with them is that spending a bit of time with them to write a report, to understand what had happened, to understand what was happening now, to understand, you know, because it was a particularly tricky one, because the salespeople just have no incentive and no need to use CRM, but the rest of the business needs them to use CRM because they're having conversations with clients and they don't even know that they're clients, you know. So you know, so it's been a very tricky one, and this is one where actually a very softly let's do agile, let's release a little bit every few weeks. What that means is you will need to put some work in as well, Mr. and Mrs. Customer. You know, and they've actually been very much on board with that, because as part of the time that we spent writing this report and doing some discovery work around it, we actually helped to show them. It was like somebody coming in from the outside and saying, do you know what, you can do this, you just got to do it a bit carefully because of this. So architects are all about risk. And as a result, at the moment, I mean, we haven't even started the implementation project yet, but we know what we're doing. We're all on the same page, very aligned. We're going to help them stand up their own team. You know, and we've even helped them to select candidates and so on, just by reviewing CVs and tweaking job descriptions and so on. So there's all sorts of things that we can do as architects to make our teams more successful. We wear lots and lots of hats. But most important of all, we have to make it, this is a leadership role. It is a delivery work stream leadership role. And there are multiple flavors. You mentioned technical architects, solution architects, that do different things and have different areas of responsibility. But if you are looking to become an architect, my advice to you would be to get involved in projects that scare you. If you get the opportunity to set up single sign-on and you've never done it in your life, and you think, oh my God, I would never ever want to do that. Why would anyone ever want to do that? Put your hand up and do it. Once you've done it, you will never look back again. And you just got to keep doing that.
Yeah, that's valuable. And listen, we're a little bit over time, but if you're up for it, I have just one final question, which I think is a good follow-up to kind of wrap this up. So kind of going back also to, you know, tying all of that we're talking about, what can a company do to perhaps prevent putting someone that doesn't have enough experience in an architect role? Because I've seen it a lot of times that companies sometimes just don't have a good assessment of skill set and say, oh, this person says they can do it, or I think this person can do it, you know, and just put them in that position. Because I think I haven't ever said this before this conversation, and I really like the fact that you said that an architect takes a leadership role, but there are, in addition to leadership, there are certain criteria that an architect needs to have. Yeah. So what are some things that a company should look for, especially if they don't have a lot of experience with Salesforce, to say, hey, you know, help me have a better degree of confidence that this person will be the architect that we're looking for in our project? And I think that'll be a great conclusion for the chat today.
I think that's an excellent question. And it speaks to a lot of traits that I've seen in the market. One is not being afraid to stand up to your customer. As a consultancy, what we often end up doing is kind of making concessions, because either we want the project, we want the customer to sign, we want the project over the line, we want, you know, some kind of compensation for our time and effort, etc. But what should sorry, my brain went. What should companies look for? Apologies, you know when your brain just goes completely blank.
Trust me, it happens to me all the time. It just hasn't happened on camera yet. But what are some of the key attributes that, you know, an architect would have, and that a company should be looking for when looking to place an architect? We talked about the leadership, someone that's not afraid to stand up to the company and kind of speak out loud if there's a better way to do what they're looking for.
Yeah, someone who challenges your thinking and asks why. Someone who wants to find out why. So if you ask them a question and the answer is yes, you're going to get something built, right? Which is fantastic. If you ask a question and the answer you get and the response you get is why and how often and how many, then you know that you've got someone who's considering all of the different possibilities of solving your business problem. The other trait that we see a lot with consultancies, you know, I've done it many times as well, is we know there's loads of ways to do things in Salesforce, right? But if you have a user story and you're thinking, I could do it this way, but it will cause that to happen, which will mean training here, which will mean some data transformation over here, which will mean another bit of integration here, because I need to update the accountancy package, which then I need to write back to here. You know, when you start thinking in that way, and you're considering trade-offs, pros and cons and so on, the temptation is to give a client a bunch of options to say, in order to, you know, resolve your requirement, you could do this and you could do that. And present and saying, if you do this, this happens, you know, pros and cons, etc. What I actually think, and I've seen this happen with the doctors as well. Doctors do it, and I recognize the behavior straight away in my doctor, because he was talking about a huge operation, piece of surgery he was going to give me, and he gave me 4 different options for it. And I could tell just by watching him as he started to explain it and the pros and cons and everything else, I was like, yeah, I know exactly what's going on here. And you're leaving your favorite one to the last. And at the end of it, I said, doctor, you've given me a bunch of options and I don't know how to cut people up and I don't know how to stitch them back together. So you tell me what you think is the best for me. And he went straight to number 4 and said, because of this and that and the other, long-term scalable growth performance, right? And that was all I heard as he was talking about like making changes to my body, but all I heard was scale, performance, volumes, all this kind of stuff. So at the end of it, I was going, thank you. You know, all I needed was a recommendation. And I think he did it really well. It's obviously a very different context, human body versus IT system. But, you know, when I'm working with customers and there are a number of options, I actually these days, and it's thanks to the CTA practice that I've been doing, I actually stopped giving options and I've just started giving one recommendation, the one that I think is best suited to that customer's needs, and then present that option and then let them challenge it. And as they challenge it, here come more and more justifications for either bending or sticking or changing that solution, and then maybe saying, once you've got a bit more information, being able to say to that customer, okay, well, now that I know all this, there is another option. And that's how you build the trust, I think, is just being really honest and understanding all of that, understanding as much as you can before you settle on a solution, and then picking your solution, recommending it, and keeping the options on the back burner in case you need them.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic way to put it. And looking back at it, I've always trusted an architect or anybody that's always come to me with a couple of options and had been able to well articulate the pros and the cons of each. And I think that does a tremendous job at building that trust that we were talking about earlier in the conversation. So I know we went over on the minutes by quite a bit, but I'm super passionate about this. I know you are, Gemma. It's been an absolute pleasure. some people are commenting. I appreciate everyone. Make sure to like if you really enjoyed it. We got a couple of people that followed us. Big shout out to Michael and Sinan. So guys, thank you so much. Gemma, thank you so much. You are more than welcome to come back and maybe pick up a couple more topics and conversations. This was an absolute blast. For everyone that's watching, if you want, please make sure to give Gemma some credit here. But at the same time, if you haven't, look up her story. It is amazing. There's just so much that we haven't covered here. Like, she is genuinely one of the most impressive people in the Trailblazer community. I'm so happy that you got a chance to join us today, and hopefully we can do a couple more in the future. And then maybe, we were talking before this whole conversation started, get a chance to connect at a world tour or something once this whole COVID situation is behind us. I think we have a beer. At least
there's a beer with your name on it.
Sounds good. All right, well, guys, listen, finish up as we're trying to finish up as always. I like to pull the great Uncle Ben quote from the big Spider-Man movie: with great power comes great responsibility. So remember to always Salesforce responsibly so you can keep building amazing solutions out there. And I'll catch you guys in the next time. Thank you, Gemma, once again.
Thank you.
And have a good evening.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening, watching.
All right.